good afternoon to Manfred and to all our friends who are on the call from different parts of the world. Thank you for joining. Dr. Sudhir Kakar is a very special person. And I first met him because he was on the board of Aisha Consulting, where I had the good fortune of being the founder of that company. And I was very struck by his intensity, by his spirit of inquiry, and always asking some very good questions. And although I didn't work with him very closely, but I was always struck by his scholarship and by the depth of his thinking. And he was, of course, a very close friend of my mentor, Mr. Vikram Lal, whom I had the good fortune of working with. So when I got this news, I thought that we should invite two very special people, Katrina, Sudhir's wife. Akshay, can you please mute your phone? Yeah, thank you. And Manfred, whom I have heard so much about over the years. There are so many people who have known Manfred and deeply inspired by his work. And the fact that Sudhir and Manfred have worked so closely together for so many decades. So I thought this would be a good way to celebrate Sudhir's life and his contribution by having both of them here. So may I begin by thanking you, Katharina and Manfred, for this call. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting us into this meeting.
Thank you. So,
but I guess it's also it brings into me, and must also be Kata, a lot of sadness. That's
yes. Well, thank you for joining. So I know it's also an occasion that makes us miss Sudhir and makes us sad. And I thought, and yet we could celebrate what his life was about. So let me begin by asking both of you, when did you experience Sudhir at his happiest best? And how was that experience when you saw that? And can you tell us more about that and some instances when you experienced that and walk us through those experiences?
Manfred, you want to start or you want me to start?
Why don't you start? You know him best. I mean,
no, you know him as well, but I can start. So for me,
I know a different angle than you do.
Yeah, for me, Sudhir was at his happiest when he was in flow, and in flow meaning that he, was in connection with his inner imagination, with his daydreams. When he had suddenly new ideas that he got excited about to either write or to talk about. So that was the happiest of him. But then, it doesn't always need to be the flow time. That is a rather rare thing. It's not something that happens to you all the time. He was happy when he was, in nature, like sitting in the garden, smoking his cigar and being in his meditation. He was fairly happy being on his own or sharing time with me and the animals. He was at his happiest when he walked at the seashore or sat there, just watching the horizon of the sea. Not to forget traveling. He really loved traveling. That made him happy to get out, not too long, but to get out. And as I said, most important for him was this inner connect of getting ideas, of having some innovative thoughts. That kind of that I think is what has been the major part of his inner happiness. What would you add, Manfred? You know him 60 years.
58.
58, okay.
I think I told you the first time I met him was, I guess he was encouraged by his aunt, Kamla Chowdhury, to take a seminar from a person who was was a psychoanalyst at the Harvard Business School, which of course was a fun. He was at Harvard because he married. And his
hands-free Bolt.
What?
May I request the host to mute everybody who's not speaking, please? And those who are not speaking, could you kindly keep your devices on mute?
I got a little bit confused, Neil. But basically, I think his aunt wanted him to become a professor of management at the IIM in Ahmedabad, which was something he was not looking forward to. I remember that, sitting in cafes and talking about it. But anyhow, at the time, I think his aunt suggested, apart from having met Erickson, who offered him a teaching fellowship at Harvard, to meet Selesnik. And so we took a seminar together. I met him there. And I don't know how it started. We walked away from the seminar, which was called Psychoanalytic Psychology and Management Theory. With strange people there. We walked from the Harvard Business School across the river to Harvard Square, and we spoke German to each other. It probably has to do some, Sudhir always being a bridge between, because he had spent quite some time in Germany, between two cultures. And I was nostalgic about being away from my home country, and I spoke German fluently. And it's a funny, I think I'm trying to mention, is a funny anecdote, which became actually the beginning of a friendship. We went to a cafe called Pamplona, which was and the Pamplona had one characteristic, meaning it had no toilet. And Sudhir at one point in time had to go to the toilet, so he went outside, and he decided to go on the corner and do in traditional manner, try to find a tree or something like that to take care of it. But unfortunately, the Harvard police passed by, and it was indecent exposure. So but he showed his university card, so they let him be. But he still hadn't peed, so he walked to the commons and talked himself into a toilet at one of the students' homes. But then he felt, I mean, it's so nice to invite me to the toilet. I at least have to have a little conversation about the meaning of life. So by the time he came back, it was, I think, 45 minutes later. So that was the beginning of a relationship, to say the least. But coming back to, I mean, as Kata says about inner and outer reality of Sudhir, and talk about the sense of flow, I have strong memories. I remember coming, he invited me to go to India, which was a few years later. And there we were. The first thing he did was to dress me in a kurta pajama. I arrived in Ahmedabad, and so we went immediately, bought a kurta pajama, and very soon after we was playing the tabla. And so you have a picture of the two of us as young kids, actually, playing the tabla. And I mean, those are some of the moments, when he was smoking cigars. Also, by the way, the other thing he did, he got me a liquor license, because Ahmedabad, as you know, is a dry place, and he liked his liquor. And so I also had bought some bottles, which he had specially asked for to bring it in. So the outwardly was, when there was music playing. By the way, I'm a little bit free associating, but he spent
actually more listening to music. I think the listening, that really kind of connected him to his inner self. He was not a good musician himself, though he liked to once in a while as a young man play, but yeah.
That's very true. But he liked to listen. I remember I met Kakar in Montreal. Also, by the way, he spent a year in my house in Montreal. I was a professor there for a while, and he spent a year there, and he didn't like the long winters in Montreal, and he got depressed. So we had a habit every Saturday, because I was in training to become a psychoanalyst too, and every Saturday we cooked together. The whole family had a big kitchen. We all cooked together, and then we had to find people to eat all the food. It was so much food. And then we went to, there was quite a strong Indian community in Montreal. So we went to one of those Bollywood movies, which, and also, again, Sudhir, when you look at him, smoking cigars, looking at movies, listening to music, and when this little, all that together was really, but I mean, to free associate a little bit, to describe him, he was, I think, very often at his best. And I think Kata made a very important point about the ability to be alone and being fake. I mean, we are in that respect very similar. He told me once, as a good analyst, you have to be somewhat schizoid. Schizoid, not as people think it superficially, but in the British way, meaning you're basically you're an introvert, and you're very self-contained. And so that he has that too. In that respect, some people have also compared him sometimes to a peach. He looks very warm and soft from the outside, but to really get close to him, that's not that easy. It takes a lot of work. It takes quite some work. But Kata can probably more say about that. But what I always liked about him, and it was probably what has some similarity, was this, and the best description is the impish quality. Uh, doing slightly naughty things, like that, and also the sense of humor about it. So to really, that was.
I agree with you. The humor, he never lost it, even in his last days in hospital. So that was, I think, a very important quality to life. To, on the one hand, being able to really deeply dive in himself and knowing himself, which is the kind of how you connect to your flow, how you connect to your own contentness, and so on. But at the same time, he was just really enjoying life, whether it was his drink or his cigar or being with people, or in early years being with women. So you name it, good food, you were cooking. So there was these both sides in him. He was very kind of sensual, and that was a good combination. But as Manfred was saying, the ability to be alone and to the ability to, be content in that aloneness is a great quality that I think everyone in this world should train a little bit. It will make one happier.
I had a lot of joy, and of course, that's a very good-looking man. And I think women noticed him in that respect. So the coming back to the sensual qualities, certainly that was a big, we talk about it, his contribution to spirituality, and also his writing about the Kama Sutra and things like that. But certainly that was a big part of him. That's not underestimate that. He also had a romantic quality. He spent quite some time, and I come of course from the Western tradition, but the romantic quality, I think about Vienna, and we spent quite some time in Vienna, and Vienna was, operettas and music and all this kind of thing, and listening to gypsy music. And I remember them making jokes to me. There was a man playing that he felt he looked like Dr. Winnicott, a famous psychoanalyst, and making jokes about play on Dr. Winnicott, and having this Heurigen, which is the sitting at the edge of Vienna and having wine, horrible wine, by the way, you get a bad headache, but he had he had quite some resistance to that kind of thing.
He showed me these old places in Vienna, in the Heurigen. So he showed me all these spaces that were important to him at the time when you were young and spent time together.
I also, he had a kind of laid back impression when you think about him, but he was a very hard worker also.
Yeah, very disciplined. So there's nothing but, you have to be concentrated and disciplined. And at the same time, again, he was always saying, who cares if I write one book more or less? So he also knew when to stop. He never worked after 5 in the afternoon. He enjoyed life. So this combination of being absolutely concentrated, disciplined, working every day, and yet letting the pen, drop, and being in day-to-day situations as well, that was a strength he also had, I think.
Also,
I admired that capacity.
I know. And thinking about, we run this seminar 25 years, I think 125 years together. And so that we spent 4 weeks of every year together. We had dinner together, lunch together, and we sat in the class together. And the class, basically, you have to make very quick decisions about the different personalities who make a presentation. You don't have the luxury as a typical, and when you have a person in treatment, of much time. And you can see that Sudhir was a very good clinician to really go to the essentials. He didn't say very much. And as a joke, actually, one of my friends, who was also a student of ours, which is now the dean of Said Business School in Oxford, he made a joke to us. He might have heard it, Kata. He said, Sudhir must have been the highest paid faculty member by word.
I heard that joke, but let me add to that. What I kind of, I think you were complimenting, I say, you were both so different. It was very good for the groups to have the listener who just merged in with very clear. Whenever he said something, it was usually to the point. There was a tremendous clarity, and most of the time he was listening and observing, and then just pulling things together. I don't know how it was in your seminars, but that's how I experienced him in many situations. And yeah, I think the two of you were, just really good together because you were so different. And I imagine that. So coming back to also what Anil said in the beginning, Anil, you mentioned Sudhir was always asking when he was on board of AICA good questions. In my opinion, someone who asks good questions or comes to the point is a very good listener, and that he was. So listening as a quality to, not to answer, but to understand, and listening to get the picture, that was a tremendous strength he had, where I think he added, whether it was in the seminar that Manfred and Sudhir were doing, or in other situations, or maybe even in his psychoanalytic sessions. I don't know about that because obviously we never talked about that. But I could imagine that that there were similar kind of ways of how he just got the essence and brought it out when the meditation à deux, came to its peak. I don't know. That's how I imagine that good questions are coming from good listeners.
I think you're very right. I mean, when he talked in class, everybody listened extremely carefully because it was very incisive. It made a lot of sense. I mean, I had to, there's something called negative capability, which is a term that, I mean, very often when people make presentation, you say, what the hell is going on? I have no sense. And you have to hold your anxiety because they expect from the faculty to make some sense. And Sudhir was very good in that, in this negative capability to hold it. I have a free association, Kata. You probably never heard that story. But, the mentor of Sudhir was Erik Erikson.
Yes.
We were very much at the time, I followed all his lectures. And of course, Erikson was an advocate of psychohistory. He wrote a book on Gandhi and wrote a book on Luther.
Right.
And of course, Sudhir was influenced by him. He was supposed to be only a year at Harvard, but because of the seminar of Selesnik asked him to write the father of scientific management, not exactly a fun person, to say the least. So he was very going to set the stage for his, I think, his psychohistorical interest. And of course, Erikson made a major contribution to developmental psychology. And this is incident. The International Psychoanalytic Association had a meeting in the Waldorf Astoria in New York. And I think we were both, I was in training, and so as an analyst, and we went to this meeting. And so it was a great celebration about the ideas of the life cycle. And Sudhir first contributed about the human life cycle being influenced. And anyhow, Erikson liked to have some exercise. And as it happens, we were all staying in Sudhir's brother-in-law's place at the time. So it became actually, in good Indian tradition, more and more people moved into this apartment and became more and more, somehow became more and more packed, but there was always place for somebody. It was kind of interesting, very different compared to Western societies where you say there's no place, but that had a swimming pool. So Erikson had been the celebration, had enough, he wants some exercise. So Sudhir said, there's a swimming pool on top of the building. So at a main traffic hour, I managed to get a taxi. So in the back of the taxi was Sudhir, Erik Erikson, and me. And the taxi driver was one of those wild taxi drivers. And so he started, in driving through the city of New York in an incredible danger. He said, you know what makes people tick? And he went on, and I looked at Sudhir. We had in the room the most famous developmental psychologist at the time in the world. And there was this taxi driver giving a lecture about human behavior. So the both of us looked at each other, smirked. Erikson didn't move a muscle. But he got a 45-minute lecture about human behavior in the taxi.
That's hilarious. Yes. So, all these amazing qualities that Sudhir had, including, I was very reminded of what my teacher, my spiritual teacher said. He said, if you don't like your own company, why inflict it on others? That was something very interesting. So it seems to me that Sudhir really liked his own company. He was a keen listener, a keen observer. He had this intensity of focus, and yet he had enough time for play and for really looking at the world as a whole and not just being one dimensional in his work. So tell me, where did all these qualities and gifts that he had, where did they come from? Who were the people who kind of influenced him, inspired him, and shaped him as a person?
I think, I mean, what Manfred was saying already, Eric Erikson was, of course, a great influence and many of his friends as well. But I wouldn't talk of gifts. I think, one of the major reasons why Sudhir was how he was is that he had a quest for life to know himself. And he was this introspection, which he made also to become his profession, that kind of openness to the world and to the universe, not knowing or not even believing in truth, but in perception only. So all these things together, I think they were the foundation on which the clarity of thought and so on could flourish. And that's also why I think his writings or his contributions are speaking to a wider audience, because he had that kind of clarity. And the clarity in bringing thoughts, complex thoughts into a very simple, expressing them in a very simple way. And I'm thinking of Albert Einstein here, who must have said at some point somewhere, if you can't explain something in a simple way, you don't understand it well enough. So he was a thinker. He understood what he was saying. He put it in a way that other people could connect to it. And that gift, I think, partly was his intelligence, partly was the love he grew up with, and partly was his self-quest, which lasted a lifelong, till the end. He was questioning till the end.
I think what you're saying is very true, Kader. I had the luxury to, when I went the first time to India, I met his father, his mother, and of course I met his aunt, Kamla, quite a few times.
Yes. She was very influential too on him.
So what I'm trying to say is that his father was a magistrate, I think, probably was quite important to stimulate his intellectual curiosity.
Yeah.
Plus Aunt Kamla, which was unfortunately, I think the relationship didn't end so well for a number of reasons. And then, of course, you have the mother, who was concerned always about Sudhir because he was just running around in Europe and he should get married, typical. So how to, and I think many young men in India probably have the same experience, the kind of intrusive mother type, who and was trying to stay a little bit distant from it. But I think those had, of course, the one who really made at the time, it was for him, since he was studying, he was an engineer. Engineering was Eric Erikson, because he was never really interested in engineering. That was not really his. And so that stimulated the side of him, I think, what was always there to some extent. And then, as you said, Kata, a lot of self-development took place. I mean, and it was not easy, because I remember in 1972, I think it was, years ago, he was in Frankfurt, and because he needed he wanted to go to psychoanalytic training. And it's not so easy to have work; you have to pay for it, so I remember driving my car, which not crashed, but the motor finished just in front of some kind of hill, and on top of the hill there was this enormous house, which Sudhir had been parked by the owner of the consulting firm he was working for. And it was quite, and the whole house was like a tomb. It was filled with a type of art which my wife gets more excited about it, but not me. It's called Art Zero. Ironically enough, later on, the owner of all this art But he had a psychology-oriented consulting firm. How Sudhir did it when he was there at the Sigmund Freud Institute. So there he was, and so he was basically, it was such an enormous house. He was basically huddled in the kitchen. That's what you have to realize, winter. This is not where you are now at the moment. Qatar was very warm winter, rather miserable outside, partly snowy, and there you are in this enormous house. This is, I think, horrible art. And so there he was, but it needed a lot of stamina to a strong will to go through that and hang in there, because training takes a long time. So he really felt the need. And I think at the time, Mitscherlich was one of the major.
Mitscherlich was, yes.
So that was also a very important developmental period for us. But he wanted, I mean, two of us as young men sitting there in cafes in Cambridge. By the way, we lived above a restaurant called the Wursthaus in the center, smack in the center of Harvard Square, in a building was going to be broken down. They said so. 20 years later, it was broken down as a Getty building, and not exactly, and that's where we lived for a number of years. And it was kind of,
he knew how to live. Circumstances might have been difficult at times, but he always kind of pulled it off by whether you cooked together, whether, one went dancing or, so that is something which I think that was also part of him. And he always had that capacity to take what he wanted, so he, in a way, had a very good life. He lived how he wanted to live. He never wanted to be bound to institutions. So he lived as an independent analyst and intellectual. So he did these things. He had the courage to do it. It was also financially not always easy. Lots of insecurities connected to that. But he did what he thought was right. And he had that kind of self-confidence within, which I think is owed to his parents and to his childhood, that he was so, standing on such a golden foundation, and that allowed him to also just live through difficult periods of his life.
Now, I think there's a word in German which I always like. It's called Lebenskünstler. Maybe you can translate.
Yeah, Lebenskünstler. That is such a beautiful word. Kind of an artist of life for those who don't speak German. It's a nice German word.
Sudhir was that because he could have taken the easy road and did what I in a way did. I became a professor eventually, going assistant associate, full professor, chair professor. But he had temporary appointments. He wanted to be independent.
Yeah.
Of course,
that freedom meant a lot to him. And it was also for him much, much more important than any amount of money that one could earn or not. That was secondary. Of course, it's nice to have money, but for him, freedom was the kind of first choice. And he lived on those kind of, how to say it, convictions.
Right.
Very much so. He also tried, because of the freedom, that he had lots of time to do interesting things. And that's element of recognition, and which actually this conference, a little conference, is a reflection of it. The ability to produce interesting things because of not stuck to political processes. He was free. He could do whatever he wanted to do. What he found interesting.
Yeah, but there was more than that. I think there was a drive to really kind of affect people around him, not just be a good analyst for his patients or for his analysans, but also to affect society through his thinking. That mattered to him. This is why I think it is important for him that we now, in his kind of name, do this cultural center for psychoanalysis and culture. And I invite everyone listening here to contribute to that. You can contact me about that also. So to affect others in a positive way, to set the right values, to to focus on empathy and love, and all that mattered quite a bit to him.
Yeah, so much so. I mean, in the same time, of course, there was the element of that he was not a stranger to some recognition. That was also and that's and that he got, and part of his mind and how creative he was. He did.
Yes. So If we were to look at the way his work impacted the world, what would you say are some significant things that he stood for and the impact that he had on the world? How would you describe that?
You know, if one tries to pull it together in one sentence, which of course is very difficult, but his interest, having lived between two worlds, his Indian cultural heritage and his Western psychoanalytic profession, he realized quite early on with the first books that he wrote that the mental representations of culture, which is nothing else than cultural imagination, that was really not explored in the right way. I mean, psychoanalysis was built on Western imagination. So that became his kind of life a thought, or a major part of his thinking and writing. And I think that really has an impact in today's world. That there's also more realization today of how important these kind of cultural thoughts are, by shifting the perception, creating awareness of the importance of culture in a society and in the mental world of people, in the mental imagination of people. I'm not sure if I make myself clear, but
yeah. Even though maybe, I mean, in France you have, they talk sometimes about Lacan, who is the French Freud, and I would call him, maybe people object to that, as the Indian Freud, that he, and it was a theme which would run through my class. I mean, we always got people from, because India has no national identity, from both East and West, although the West people dominated in general, but to give people a sense of cultural relativity. And so in the Western world, this kind of ideal of being independent, he would always interdependence.
Yeah, that is so true.
And so in a way, I don't think there are many people who have such a deep understanding of both the Western culture, and also realizing that when you talk about psychoanalysis, an example, it's very much a product of middle class Western culture, and as opposed to Eastern culture, and to make this bridge and see the cultural relativity of that I find always has his
I totally agree. I mean, one looks, for example, on his writings maybe 10 years ago on mysticism and psychoanalysis. I find it very interesting how he always tries to point out, as different as both traditions, mysticism in India, psychoanalysis in the West, might be, there's a lot each can learn from each other. So this cultural bridge builder, but his thinking was more than that, but it was always also to kind of enlighten the other side, whether it is psychoanalysis or whether it is cultural traditions, through the knowledge of the other. And I think that is something that we all can kind of benefit and learn from. That openness.
There are many faculty members in this call today who are learning and teaching about management, and there are several those who also study leadership. There are also some young students who have joined the call to also learn from this conversation. So, one of the aspects that people are trying to appreciate more is this whole idea of authentic leadership. And I know that Sudhir, definitely the way he was himself, he was a very authentic person and an authentic leader. But what can you help us to understand and appreciate? How can his work help people to source that authenticity within themselves? Because that's something which is badly missed in workplaces. Because in large organizations, it seems the more they want to transform, the more they talk about putting things in control. So more measures, more reviews, more controls. And, so people kind of feel lost in many of these large organizations. So I'm curious to know your perspective on how that whole sourcing of authenticity within oneself and others could be linked to his work. So would you like to talk a bit about that, both of you?
I sometimes use the metaphor of the starfish. You probably know it about was a storm, and a terrible storm. And the next day, a man was taking his dog for a walk on the beach, and on the beach were thousands of starfish. A young lady picking one starfish up at a time and throw it in the water. And this man said, the cynical man said, "What are you doing? You can make a difference. There are millions of them." He said, "It makes a difference to this one." So what I'm trying to say is that he and I, at least when I worked with him, in our seminar in which we would have 21 executives who are, many of them run very large organizations. We had the fantasy that if we make those people more reflective, to help them in their self-knowledge and self-understanding, that would have a trickle effect to the organization. I mean, Tata is a good example. I mean, we had, after a kind of a hiccup beginning, as I was explaining to you, it's every year, and Baron, quote unquote, of Tata has been in the seminar. And so what we try to do is to, even though it seems rather small, also sometimes through writings, to have an effect and to really try to make, of course, people always say, you have to be a son of a bitch to be a good executive, but that's not for the long run. And so in that respect, trying to make a contribution, that was that was our philosophy when I worked with him, try to make a small contribution to the world I mean, the 21 people you would have might be responsible for 100,000 people. And so that's what we try to do. Of course, it's just a drop. It's like another sea star into the ocean, but that's what we did. If everybody...
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Manfred, that this was really, I mean, the difference is that you change yourself, and through that change, you also change others. So the authenticity of a person doesn't just come. It's growing through integrity. And I think that's also something that one conveys. So I would add to Manfred that I think what Sudhir would, if he would be here today, maybe also say is practice empathy in your work field, in your personal field, and that kind of empathy to at times put others before you, and not always pushing your own ideas through, and so on. That is also one part of it. And I remember that he was telling me that all the leaders in your course, Manfred, that when you work together, that if you make it to such a space, being a leader, you are a very sensitive person, which often people don't realize how sensitive leaders are, because they have to at times make hard decisions. But that kind of sensitivity, to tap into that through self-exploration, reflection, as you said, practicing empathy, I think that would have mattered. And I think I believe that makes a difference despite difficult circumstances in huge firms.
You have to, also people become aware that there are times they can be ice cream salesmen, and there are times they have to be a dentist for the good of the organization. That's not easy, but it needs some self-knowledge, and also how to bring the message, to have and coming with empathy and compassion, to and be able. I remember I had one executive from India who every time he raised his hand in class would say, "I have 3 points to make." He was brilliant, by the way. He was brilliant, and he makes extremely to the point points. And so the two of us were trying to tell him, and he was actually in the race to become the CEO. Said, if a young executive comes into your office and you say, "I have 3 points to make," and say, "Point number one, point number two, point number three," it's already intimidating to come into your office. And couldn't you say, can you start with a little bit of small talk? Try to imagine how this young man or woman feels when he gets in the office, and then maybe make some points. I think he didn't get it completely. He didn't become the CEO, as I remember. But we try to make people more aware of the effect they also have on the organization. And if they would come to our seminar to give to become a charismatic leader in one easy lesson, that's not the way it is. It starts with the leader within. If you know yourself, you start to react to people differently, also in your family and things like that. Because many of the issues that come up in the end in the seminar, I once wrote a book called Sex, Money, Happiness, and Death. But those were in the end, it was a look for meaning. So those were the things. And the big things were, of course, interpersonal relationships. You know, and in the end, it might you talk about. I mean, I have a difficult relationship with my chairman of the board, or I have a difficult with my team. But in the end, it comes to the people very close to you, which is usually significant other, children, and people like that. And how
But
to
but we come also back to the listening part of being able to listen to others and to, also have the courage in conflicting situations to, to speak about it. I think that is also part of the authenticity and of the integrity. If one needs to have the courage to take responsibility, and to also in certain hierarchical situations, word things and speak out, and if it doesn't work out, leave.
I mean, there's a quality I sometimes talk about. It's called the teddy bear factor, although he was not a teddy bear.
He was.
He made, when you were with him, you felt good. And that was very important because in coming back to compassion, and him listening very carefully to what you had to say. But he could also make sometimes very tough interventions and, say some real and bring people back to reality. It was not just kumbaya together and, being love and games, because the art was how to, in a constructive way, teach also the people to give difficult messages, because that's part of leadership. How to do it in how to give feedback in a constructive way, that people hear it and don't get all the defenses get up and things like that.
Yeah. I think that's also sensing the wound in a person, right? Because where the wound is, that's where you open up, that's where you change. And I think he had an ability to just smell it, to just sense it, and then get to the point there. I don't know. That's how I experienced him very often, that he was very, very good in a constructive way. But as you said, also at times very, very, I mean, you have to be real and hard to yourself.
Now, when he was at McGill, I think he was also involved with my wife. My wife is, I think, his research assistant or something like that. I'm not clear what the title was, but he was doing group dynamics. And, when you talk about, coaching is very popular. And coaching is, of course, a derivative of psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. But to coach in a group is tough because it's one-to-one. And so he had a very, coming back to the comment, negative capability to hold the group and to manage your anxiety about not knowing. Because many times you don't know. It's a very complex entity when the group as a whole. And that was for me always very sure. At lunchtime, we would discuss things. Well, I was more, I said, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And he said, cool it. He was calming me down. But and we don't talk much about his contact because much of his work has been on a one-to-one basis or his writing. But he was an excellence. I think also at Ahmedabad he taught on group dynamics. He was very good in holding groups and making sense taking place. Somebody has to turn off.
May I request the ones who are not speaking to kindly mute their devices? Yes. Yeah, please continue. Yeah.
No, but I mean, that's, I think, a side of him that not so often comes across, because I've seen, because he worked with it, but the ability to manage complex entities like a group and try to make sense of the complex dynamics and get the best out of people.
Yeah.
You have not much time, because when you deal with CEOs, captains of industries, initially don't have much patience, but the magic after a number of weeks is incredible, and those groups are still together. Some of the
that is unbelievable. How some of the groups are still, meeting each other.
As a mutual support group, and it is because of his talent already to understand the group dynamics and make sense out of those complex issues.
Very nice.
Very well said.
Yes. I have the privilege of helping the Tata Group and especially Tata Steel to do the leadership process of succession planning, right from when Mr. Muthuraman was chosen to his successor and then following his successor. And I remember the second time we were involved in this process of choosing the next managing director or CEO, I had suggested we do a workshop for the leadership team over a few days. And we had kept aside 2 hours for these colleagues to share stories and narratives about their lives with each other. And I was absolutely amazed. These people had worked together on an average for 25 years. But when they began to talk about the narratives of their lives, that evening it took 4 hours. And next day they took another 5 hours. So 9 hours just sharing the narratives of their lives. At the end of it, one of them said to me, this reminded me of the time I spent in the workshop with Manfred and Sudhir, because he said, this is something astonishing. He said, it seems the two of you would encourage before people would come to your workshop, you would encourage them to describe the narrative of their lives. And yes.
I mean, it's basically, I tell them, think about, you have to make a documentary of your life. You have 45 minutes. What are the scenes you're going to put in there?
Yes.
And of course, the Tata people, I have, starting with Muthu, I had every year, that has been my most faithful customer. Still, I stopped, but still the Tata, and I have a successor, still Tata is coming. It seems to be one of the finishing. You finally go to INSEAD to go to this crazy seminar, and you learn about storytelling, because leadership is storytelling.
Yeah.
That's what you're born story. And Sudhir was a very good storyteller. And also, to say it so.
Go ahead.
No,
yeah, the importance of story. I mean, the also, what is fact, what is fiction? We are all fiction in a way. Our memories change constantly as we evolve through life. So he understood that also, that that's what is the fabric of ourselves, I guess, being storytellers, being stories, changing stories. And what I also remember, what Sudhir was telling me about this seminar, which I thought was very interesting, that before you chose CEOs to join that group, they also had to speak or to express their fantasies. You need to have people in that group who are capable of imagining. So there we are back. Good storytellers are good people who can imagine very well.
No, we interviewed them. We didn't want to work too hard, Kata, because we need and minimum psychological sense. Otherwise, I mean, we would have to work too hard. So we did the interview, and also we had a horrible admission form, which I designed, which is actually the beginning of it, all very personal questions about describe yourself. If you have children, what they like, what some difficult moments in your life. So, but the center of the seminar, because how do you entertain, quote unquote, 21 senior executives? They're all somewhat narcissistic. They like to talk about themselves, but they cannot talk at the same time. So they learn that it sounds very boring, but listening that every story is different. And you learn from the stories, and your mirror neurons in your brain start to work overtime, because narcissistic as you are, you identify with the story. And then after you said, when I was in a situation, I had done this. So people also altruistic motive come there. So in a way, people learn coaching, but it becomes a massive group coaching effort, which will stay with them for life. As I said, some people 25 years later are still meeting because they know. So every year they meet and they say, okay, what happened during the year? What are your issues? And so they are a mutual support society. Also, they meet each other, of course, more informally in other situations. But it's because of this very powerful experience.
But also, I think of the capability in that group, or in general in settings of leadership, I guess, to build trust.
Yes, absolutely. And I realize that there are only about 10 minutes left in this conversation. So may I invite anybody from the audience who wants to ask questions? From the audience, is there somebody who would like to ask a question or offer a comment?
Come on, don't be shy, huh? Let's ask a question to Kata. Don't be shy.
You can ask anything. I'm not necessarily answer everything, but
Would
Hello.
anybody from the
Yeah,
audience? Yeah.
Anil, I'm
Yeah.
PV here. Can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. No, thanks for this. I think that, this is such a profound experience listening to both Kathy and Manfred. I don't have any question, but, I have a recollection or an association. When I went to INSEAD, in one of the conversations, Manfred talked about Sudhir. I got interested and I came back and I wrote a mail to him. And of course, there was a delay of a week or so, and then he responded. I said something like, I want to come and meet you in Goa. And he said that, of course, I'm traveling to Europe. Once I'm back, we'll catch up. This was a few years back. This was, I think, some 8, 9, 10 years back. But it was so unfortunate that, I could never meet him in his lifetime. But listening to all the experiences of Manfred, who was my professor, guru, inspiration, and many, fortunately, I met him a few weeks back in Mumbai. It was so very good. So thank you very much for coordinating this one. And thanks to Manfred and Kathy as well. Thank you.
Very kind. Very kind.
Questions from the audience? Would any of you like to ask questions?
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
would. I'm Srinivasan, associated with the soil. I have a question to Catherine. Can you describe some of the work you have done with Sudhir? Some of the work and the impact it has created to the people concerned or to the society.
I have not worked kind of in the psychoanalytic field. I'm not a psychoanalyst. I'm coming from the field of comparative religion. But to give you an example how we worked when we wrote the book together, there was a lot of discussion. There was a lot of difference and, a lot of debate. And again, so there's quality to listen. I learned from that because I'm much more kind of impulsive and than he is. So the different kind of points of view to bring those together, and as Manfred was mentioning, he was always able to hold things. So that is something that where I benefited definitely working with him on things. Or for example, we were always each other's first readers of texts that we had written, and he was very good in taking criticism. So he understood that constructive criticism is that's the only way you can kind of move forward. So he was always very open to that. He was never the kind of person who wanted the pat on the back and just to hear how great everything is. He was very down to earth, and his intention and wish in communicating with others and is to improve whatever he had worked on, and not just to hear how great he is. He was not a fan of that. Does that answer a little bit your questions?
Yeah, definitely. It answers a lot.
Down to actually, I have an association, Kata. When I met my wife, and then she was not my wife, and there was not a great enthusiasm on part of both families at the time, because she had been married and had 2 children. And so what I did is I put her in the car and drove from Amsterdam to Vienna, where Sudhir was, to get his
opinion.
It was a very positive one.
Of course, I mean, and it was the right with the right answer. You're still married. Yeah. That's trust.
Yeah. More questions or comments from the audience? Okay, let me ask another question while people are still thinking about it. If I were to put myself into the shoes of some young students who are into higher education, some of whom are on this call, what would you describe as the essence of his work that could help young people to source inspiration in their own lives to become better versions of themselves? What would you describe the essence of this work? And what would you recommend to the young people on this call to learn from his work and his life?
One thing, certainly courage. Have the courage to be yourself, to think kind of out of the box, and break hierarchies. So that is something that he always did, and that's why his writing is also very unique, because he had that courage. So have courage, have trust and courage in whatever you're working on and believe in. That is definitely one thing. And I can't stress the fact of empathy enough, because that's a major factor in Sudhir's life. And I think it has impacted his work and also how it impacted the world in a big way. So to have the capacity or develop the capacity, it's nothing that is God-given. It's something that you work on all the time, to feel yourself into others, whether it is nature, animals, human beings, a work situation, and so on. And I think that will bring you pretty far on your path, wherever that path will go.
I think that's very interesting. I always saw Sudhir as the older brother I never had. Sorry. And what I felt very courageous was his, and we didn't talk about that. We talk about his more conceptual contributions. Also, is about his ability to be also a novelist. That I
Again,
felt
courage. Yeah.
Courageous to write those novels, which I never. I have written fairy tales, but I've never been able. I was admired his ability to. I read some of them, and of course I read most of his. I read most of his book, almost all of them, I think. But that was, I felt, again, the courage of doing something out of the ordinary. It's not so easy to write. Everybody says,
Yeah.
But do it well.
And he also had it in his private life. I mean, just imagine when I came into his life, I was half his age. I was 28 when I met him. He was 56 at that time. In an Indian family setting, don't think it was easy, neither for me or for him. He just, he had the courage to live what he thought was right. And that was professional, that was also in his private life. And he believed in himself. Otherwise, if you don't believe in yourself or in your abilities, then obviously you won't build up that courage to, stand up for yourself. So I agree with Manfred there, that he had always that curiosity and interest to venture further in novel writing, also in venturing into, certain cultural settings he grew up with, and trying to figure out, is there something else than what my profession as a psychoanalyst has taught me? So he had always had that openness to open windows and not close doors.
He was certainly not a religious psychoanalyst, which I'm not either.
No, he was not. He was not.
But I think what you say is that the important thing, which I got from him, and coming back to the word Lebenskünstler, which sounds a little bit playful only, but it's not playful only, but make the best of the time you have in this life. To really,
absolutely.
And so that tells it to young people, and own your own life. Own your own life. Don't
exactly own your own life, and really believe that you only have one life and make the best out of it.
That's absolutely very nice to know this. And thank you, Katharina. In experiencing Katharina, you today, I could see the very deep love that you feel for him. And that even though he is physically not there, but I think his spirit lives through you and your presence. And so thank you for...
Thank you so much. And may I add, I want his spirit to also live through the culture center that we are now founding. It's a Section 8 company, and I'd like really to invite everybody who's listening here to connect. We need to kind of build a seed fund. I need to open doors to Indian people and factories and industries to fund that center, to bring his work and also beyond his work, to bring that forward. So if I may request you to please help Sudhir's spirit to live on in that center.
Thank you very much.
I just thank Anil for this initiative. That was very, very kind of you to do so. It was,
Yes.
I mean,
And Manfred, I just experienced what a wonderful person you are. I have heard so many stories about you. And, I have been doing these transformational leadership workshops for CEOs for a long time. And many of them who sort of experience you said to me always that you have to go and experience Manfred and you have to be there with him. And, I'm so happy that I could meet you today and I could see how the kind of friendship you had with Sudhir. I think you are blessed and Sudhir is blessed to have had this friendship.
Yes.
Because it's very
Totally.
rare to have this kind of a deep friendship of complete acceptance and enjoying each other's the dance that you do together and the play and learning from one another. So I'm very, very grateful that you chose to invest this 1 hour with us. I'm very, very thankful to you. Thank you very much.
I could do.
Anil, also from my side, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to people you're connected to. And it was fun, Manfred, to see you on Zoom again. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And may I thank all the folks in the audience. I know Vijay Mahajan is here. He was a student perhaps in IIM Ahmedabad. And Vijay is the founder of one of India's largest not-for-profit organizations. And to see Yogesh Andle here, the founder of many tech companies. And thank you, Swati, who's also a writer and from Aisha Group. So wonderful people here on this call. So thank you very much for all coming together and co-creating this very wonderful experience. Thank you very much. Thank you. All the
Thank you.
very best.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.